And so, are you ready? Are you ready for freedom? Are you ready to be yourself? Are you ready for freedom? Because freedom is always here now, patiently waiting for you. The stillness, the silence that is the true nature of all beings is right here. It is the presence that is this moment, empty of its content. And you are this moment. You are this now. When we empty this moment of content, freedom is here. Truth is here. The self that is the one self is right here. It is the content that causes the problem. It is the content that creates the misunderstanding. The conditioned mind is habitually drawn to the content of experience, the content of this moment, and so completely misses the incredible reality that is right here, underlying all of the supposed content. So we quite simply do not give attention to the content. We give attention to the moment, to the presence, to the now. But we do not try to find it with the mind. We fall into a felt sense of being here, a felt sense of being, the simple being that is alert, open, wants nothing, that just is. The stillness, the silence, the simplicity, underlying all that moves and changes, underlying the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations, is a stillness that is your direct access to your true nature, direct access to freedom itself. Simply being here. So as these words come, it is to not listen with the mind, it is to listen with the innermost being. Without knowing what that means, we could say, without the mind knowing what that means or how to do that, the innermost being itself listens. When the innermost being is listening, listening is completely open, and you are just like an antennae that is receiving. You are receiving the resonance of your true nature. When there is a recognition, when there is a resonance of recognizing something true, this signals that the innermost being is receiving itself. This signals that the innermost being is recognizing that resonance of its own nature. So it is not to overlook the resonance This is why there is the speaking, that it is about the resonance. It is the resonance of recognition. When you recognize truth, when there's a moment where it feels clear and something seems to click, but it's not a mental understanding, you are receiving the resonance, and this gives the signal that your innermost being is receiving the subtle frequency of true nature, that it is the innermost being itself that is listening and receiving. It's the signal that everything is aligned and opening. There is no doing here. There are no instructions to follow. There is just simple pointing to what is already here. There is a narrating the finer points of this landscape of consciousness, this one consciousness. All beings belong to the one being that is pure consciousness. This is the true nature. It is your true nature, and it is right here now. You are the freedom. You are the one. So it is in the stillness, the silence, the simplicity, the pointing to what is here points to the stillness, the unmoving presence that is right here as the moment, empty of all content. The moment that is empty of all content. Okay. This moment empty of all content is the open presence of being. The open presence of being. And this being is yourself. This moment empty of content is the emptiness of simply being. That underlying all that is moving and changing, there is this open, empty, humble being that just is. The stillness, the silence, the simplicity. The pointing is to what is always here, what has always been here, what never ever moves or changes. It is the pure awareness that is aware of what moves and changes, but is not touched in any way. When you feel yourself here now, you feel yourself here as the being, the presence that is still, silent, simple being. It just is. It is not for the mind to wonder, well, how, but is it? Because the mind cannot get this. The mind is not what is used here. So it is opening to something that is unfamiliar to the mind. When the innermost being is listening, openly listening, and signaling through the resonance, feeling attuned, then it is the whisper of the innermost being itself that whispers to itself. The self whispers to itself, the truth, remembering the truth of who you are. Mm. Mm. The misunderstanding is that you are a person, an individual, a separate one, and that the world is happening to you. This is the misunderstanding. You cannot think your way out of this misunderstanding. It is just to recognize the truth. But of course, this recognition has to arise in its own perfect timing, divine timing. And divine timing is falling into the recognition that who you are is the timeless being. Perfect timing is now. Perfect timing is always now. You are the now. You are the being that is ever present, omnipresent, here now. The stillness, the silence, the simplicity, that which just is, the beauty that just is, here, now, knowing itself, awake, alert, alive, knowing itself, innocently, innocently knowing itself, not wanting anything, not needing anything, just simply being itself. And you are that. You are that being right here now. And so as these words come, it is just to receive the resonance. The pointing is a transmission that offers the possibility of attuning to the resonance, attuning with your innermost being that already knows this truth. So it is just the awakening of the one that already knows. The one that already knows has been identified with a small singular point, but it is just waiting, alert and ready, to remember its infinite eternal nature. And the moment is now. The perfect timing is always now. The perfect timing is now. You are the now. You are the purity. You are the auspiciousness and simplicity of the being that knows itself right now. The knowing is already alive inside you. It is just about remembering. And the remembering comes when the resonance of the innermost being is listening to itself, recognizing itself, attuning. And this is when you recognize truth. You recognize the resonance. It's not an understanding with the mind, but there's just an attuning. Something starts to click. There's a yes inside. There's a divine smile that starts to beam its radiance. So this is the signal. This is the signal that the innermost being is listening, and the mind is starting to relax, quieten. So the innermost being is listening. Once the transcendent field is awake and alive enough, because this recognition is that you are the transcendent field. It might feel like you are someone that transcends, falls into a state of deep rest, like a samadhi. And then this is where the transcendent field awakens to itself. You are the transcendent field that awakens to itself. When you fall into being the transcendent field, you leave the person behind. You leave the person behind. You leave the story of being someone with all these things to do. You leave it all behind. when you are ready for freedom. When freedom is ready for you, the moment that is the now is attuned, awake, alert, receiving the resonance of truth, like a clear bell ringing. It is not about the words. It is not about understanding in the way the mind is familiar with. It is about receiving a resonance and the knowing of the being that you are coming online, a remembering, a divine remembering. When the innermost being is receiving the resonance, is what is listening, then everything is aligned. Everything is aligned. The transcendent field is open, awake, and clear. And you are aligned with the transcendent, open, awake field that is the infinite, unbounded one, the self that is free and true and clear. Openness, equanimity, divine. Simple, stillness, silent being. This is the true nature. So as these words come, just be the antenna that receives the signal, and then feel that resonant aliveness coming alive inside you, receiving the resonance, recognizing the resonance. You are attuned to the frequency of now, attuned to the frequency of the infinite, eternal field, the omnipresent field that is the true being that you are. The stillness, the silence, the simplicity. So you feel yourself here now. You feel the simplicity of just being here, before the name, the story, before all thoughts, and before the very first I thought that gets the engine of misunderstanding up and running. The feeling of yourself just being here, just simply being. This is the open door, the open portal, the aperture to the flow of grace. It is to put yourself into the flow of grace through just being here. You open to be carried by the wind of grace, to be carried by the wind of grace into the infinite unboundedness of divine remembering. Recognize the stillness, the unmoving, still nature of just being. That the being is always here, silent, still, and yet alert, because the silent being is always awake to itself, always awake to itself, simply being itself, knowing itself, clearly knowing itself. And so when there is a coming to the felt sense of being, coming to this aperture, this openness, attuning with the recognition of this infinite, vast field of silent presence. It is an infinite field, a boundless field, silent, simple. There is no containment here. There are no edges here. As these words come, it is to recognize in the felt sense of yourself being here that you are not contained, you are not limited, You are not bound or defined in any way by the story, by thoughts. Past and future are just figments of the mind, and they do not bind you or define you in any way. You are freedom itself. You are the unbounded field. You cannot find yourself anywhere, and yet the knowing informs you without question that you are here. The knowing is free. The knowing is the being, simply being itself. And as the resonance starts to become more alive, there is a letting go and a quality of simple trust that comes in. Not a trusting in something, but a pure trust that comes through recognition of what is true. When you recognize what is true, you do not have to evaluate and qualify the situation. When you recognize what is true, it is yourself. There is nothing else here but yourself. And the knowing itself allows a trust that lets go into itself. Lets go into itself. Letting go into yourself. Letting go into yourself. Simply being here. Simply being, the silent being. The stillness that is unmoving, the stillness that is unchanging, the stillness that is simply aware of what does move and change, and yet not touched in any way by the moving and changing patterns of consciousness, not identified in any way with the moving, changing patterns of consciousness. The stillness knowing itself, resting in its own nature. Stillness, being stillness. Feel the aliveness of the recognition of stillness. It is the recognition of the presence, your own presence, simply being here. The alive field of still, silent presence is awake to itself, awake and knowing itself. And as you attune, as the innermost being is listening and attuning with the resonance of truth, the recognition, you start to feel the aliveness of yourself being the infinite field. You start to recognize that you are not the person, that you are not separate in any way, that you are not the mind, you are not the body, that you are the infinite unbounded field. You start to feel so clearly that your true nature, the innermost being itself, can feel the truth. The knowing itself knows what it has always known. It is so clear that this knowing is an eternal knowing. It is not new. It is a remembering of what has always been here. It is a dawning of a remembering of the brilliance of being that you are. Remembering the truth of who you are. Can feel yourself everywhere, nowhere. You know you are here, but you do not know how you know, because it is the knowing itself that knows. The knowing itself knows itself. The knowing is a field of intelligence. It is a field of alive intelligence that knows itself, awake to itself, simply being itself. And you are this field. The field is freedom, is peace. A peace that is not disturbed in any way by what is moving and changing. You are love without condition. You are life without condition. You are beauty, innocence, immaculate being. It is just this simple remembering. When the knowing is alive, just being, the remembering is simple and divine. The aliveness of knowing is flowing, flowing, flowing within itself. Feel the stillness. Feel the silence. Let the focus be with the still, silent being. Let the focus be with the openness of just being yourself. Let the focus be with this resonance of truth, recognizing the truth of who you are, recognizing the truth of not being separate from the whole. Can feel yourself as the boundless, infinite being. It is the surrender of the singular point into being the infinite field. So the feeling of being everywhere and unbounded with no containment is the feeling of being awake to yourself at every point in this infinite field, awake simultaneously at every single point. So you cannot find yourself at a singular point. You can only find yourself to be absolutely everywhere simultaneously. And so the feeling of being confined to the body dissolves into being the vast open field. And then the perspective shifts, and you are seeing as the infinite. You are seeing as the infinite presence. And seeing as the infinite presence, you can see the person you thought you were. You can see the mind, you can see the body, you can see the person, but you know that who you are, in truth, is not limited in any way. You have lost the story of separation. You have lost the binding habit of the illusion, feeling like reality, and you are awake to the true and simple reality of being the infinite, eternal being, knowing yourself. The innermost being itself knows itself as the being. And in this clear seeing, the story of being a person goes completely up in smoke. The stillness, the silence, the simplicity of just being. When you are ready for freedom, there is an aliveness, there is a magnetic pull, because the innermost being is attuned and ready, alert, awake and ready. Freedom is always, always ready for you. Freedom is the infinite field of being that is ever present, ever awake, always here now. So to come to the here now, to just simply being, is to open to the infinite field of true nature. Just simply being yourself. And so as the aliveness of the field starts to be recognized, the mind quietens. And it needs for the mind to quieten. It needs for the distractive pull of the world to lose its allure, and for the allure to be with the being itself. Has to be the recognition that who you are as the being is completely separate from the world and the play of being someone that you have believed. So we are seeing through separation, through using clear seeing of separation. You see so clearly as the being that who you are as the being is completely separate from the world. We have to sever all ties from the world in just an instant. In just an instant, we sever all ties from the world. We sever all ties from the mind and the habit to be distracted. We sever all ties in a moment and recognize very clearly that who you are is nothing to do with the character, nothing to do with the person, nothing to do with the story, the drama, the roles, the name, nothing to do with anything that you can be aware of, and everything to do with just being. This is who you are. When you clearly see that you are absolutely not entangled in any way, that you are totally free of the world, of the person, of the story, of the misidentification. You are completely free of all of that. You discover the consciousness that you are. Consciousness itself wakes up to itself and recognizes, clearly recognizes, the truth is that you are not a separate entity, and you never ever have been a separate entity. You are the divine being. You are the divine being that is the self. You are everywhere. You are openness. You are not bound in any way. So this clear seeing dispels, dissolves all concepts and ideas. But if there are concepts and ideas of the mind that are moving, that are gripping on, it will act as obstruction to clear seeing coming in. If you are moving in the mind with opinions or judgments or questions, it will act as obstruction to clear seeing. Of course, you cannot stop the mind in the way that we would like to, but you can come to the being. And when you come to the being, feeling the resonance of the innermost being, listening, receiving, knowing itself, just simply being, this shifts the focus from the habitual focus of the mind to be compelled with itself to the focus being, that awareness is just being with itself. The presence, the stillness, the silence is simply being with itself. Being with itself. Being with yourself. Being with the self, the one self. All beings belong to the one being. So you follow the longing of the heart. You follow the longing that says, yes, ready for freedom. Yes, ready for being the self. You follow the longing, and it brings you to the awake presence of this moment. And when this moment is empty of all content, all that remains is the simplicity of being, and the remembering, remembering that this is who you are. The knowing knows, the knowing knows, the knowing itself is the being itself. It's clear, awake, alive. There is an alertness, The alertness really comes alive when the field is animated, recognizing the stillness, the presence that is so alive. The alertness comes online when the innermost being is receiving the resonance. The signal is the alertness, the awakeness, this compelling pull. And when the compelling pull is the being with itself, the patterns of consciousness that are the usual habitual distraction start to relax themselves, start to soften. And so the focus can be even more clear, even more intense, until just for a moment, the patterns of consciousness relax completely and create a clear reflection where boom, the perspective of seeing can completely shift. The self seeing itself in the mirror of clear, shining light, reflecting just its very own nature, because there is nothing else acting as a disturbance. When there is nothing else acting as a disturbance, the clear seeing, the clear reflection can come in as divine remembering. The resonance of the innermost being, recognizing itself, hearing itself, knowing itself, and clearly awake to itself as this infinite field. Great glory, great glory. The bliss of being yourself is right here. And then it is just to receive the sweetness, drink in the sweetness, the sweet nectar of your own knowing. Drink in the nectar, the sweet nectar of your own knowing. Stay so close and intimate with the knowing. It is the knowing of the being that carries you deeper and deeper, so that this recognition can settle, can really settle. And you drink in the sweetness. You do not give it to the mind to try to grasp or understand or work out, because that creates an immediate contraction. Suddenly, the first I thought is off and running. The engine of the me is back online, and off we go. But in an instant, just being can shut down the engine. Just simply being, by not feeding that pull to move towards the mind, by not feeding that habitual habit, not nourishing what is not true, but nourishing reality, nourishing what is real, so you can open to this infinite field that is the truth, is the Atman, the truth of who you are. And when consciousness is awake to itself, then everything is happening in the field of consciousness. The process of opening and opening and opening into the finer and finer remembering, that suddenly the perspective shifts and you are everywhere. You are the open field, and you can see the person. You can see that everything that you thought was happening to you is actually happening in you, that you are the vast field. You are the open spaciousness in which everything is happening. Everything is happening in you. And then naturally, the process is of taking in everything so that you become everything. You take in everything and you become everything. The self becomes everything. The aliveness that is flowing offers this possibility of consciousness to flow within itself and become everything in a divine remembering that everything that seems to be separate, everything that seems to be an object, and that you are the subject, there's a merging, a simple process of utterly becoming one with everything in a clear knowing that you are one with everything, the self recognizing itself in everything, flowing within itself, seeing itself in everything. Wherever there is a sense of being separate from, because it feels like everything is in you, you're the space, it's in you, but there's still a subject-object relationship. So you have to flow into everything as the consciousness that can become one completely. This process of becoming one with everything, becoming one with everything. But it's not someone becoming one with everything. It is the consciousness itself, remembering itself and becoming one with everything. Unquestionably swallowing everything into divine remembering. It's a natural process. And this is the purpose of the play of the world. The play of the world is offering this possibility to remember, receive, and become one with absolutely everything. So you recognize that who you are. We could say you can first recognize that you are the field, the open field in which everything is taking place. And then you start to recognize that everything that is in you is you, that you are everything, that you are the world. The world is the self is the world, that you are the self, seeing itself, recognizing itself in everything, in everything. And then, of course, at some point, it all disappears. Where the self stops referencing itself because it knows itself so deeply. It stops referencing itself. Prior to consciousness, the Atman remembers that it is Brahman. So we start with the stillness, the silence, the simplicity. The silence, the true silence, is the stop of the mind, the stop of the mind that allows clear seeing of consciousness to be aware of itself, simply, purely aware of itself, just being itself. You are the being, you are the simple being, you are the open field of infinite, eternal, pure awareness, aware of itself, simply being aware. The aware being can be aware of what is moving and changing, but it has to focus completely upon itself, in order to know itself, in order to remember its own wakeful nature, the wakeful nature that is your true nature, that you are always the wakeful one. You are always the wakeful one. Here, now, the simplicity of being yourself. The simplicity of being yourself. You feel yourself as the stillness, not the person that is still, but the stillness is an aware stillness, aware of the person, not identified with the person, aware of the person. And in this, you release the identification, you release the habit to identify with the mind, the thoughts, the story, the feelings, the emotions, the name. You release the habit to identify at a singular point of reference by just watching and recognizing, bringing the focus to recognize that if you are the awareness that is watching, then you cannot be limited in the way that you have believed yourself to be. It's so clear. Say yes. Yes. It's so clear. It's so clear. I cannot be the person. I cannot be limited by the mind because I am aware of the mind. I cannot be limited by the body because I am aware of the body, and I am watching the body from the vastness of the infinite field that is the true one that I am. Only that can say I am that. Only that can recognize what that truly is. What is that? What is that? You are that. You are that. What is that? That is not the person. That is the I am presence recognizing itself as that. Only that can say, I am that. You can only say, I am that, when you recognize that you are not identified with the mind or the body, that you are not the person, that you are that. You are that infinite, eternal being. You are that freedom, peace, pure, immaculate being that is unbounded everywhere. You are that. You are that which is, that just is, simply being itself. The aliveness of the presence of yourself being, infinite being, alive and awake to itself. We could say the still silence of being, and there is a dynamic, alive quality here too. The alive, dynamic quality is where the flow of becoming everything starts to arise from, where the silence and its dynamic nature meets. It's like where the sun goes down at the horizon. It's that horizon point, the moment of becoming, the moment that silence becomes. There is an aliveness of knowing. There is an aliveness of knowing. The dynamic aliveness of silent being knowing itself, awake to itself, knowing itself. The field of silent presence, awake, awake, remembering itself. Remembering that it has always been like this. It has always been that you are freedom, that you are peace, that you are the eternal, infinite one. You recognize the true nature. You recognize the true nature is not identified with the body or mind or the story. That the past and the future and the story are completely irrelevant in the fullness, the richness of now, in the emptiness of this now, where there is no content. Where did the content go? Great mystery, great glory. Where did the content go? When the attention is not upon the moving, changing, the content completely disappears. Was it ever here? Being yourself, being yourself, being the divine being. Wherever you find yourself is where awareness is. Whether you feel yourself to be the stillness, the silence, the aliveness, you are the infinite open field. Everything is taking place in you. And if you are in the process of becoming, remembering the Atman, the unified field, can feel the flow of remembering. There's so much joy and jubilation and aliveness here in remembering yourself in absolutely everything. Even remembering yourself in all of the things that present on the surface of life as challenge. You see, you take it in, you receive it, you become one with it through feeling the feelings. And then great joy, great celebration. It is yourself. It was only ever yourself. Great jubilation, great celebration to meet yourself in absolutely everything, so that this vast field becomes full with its own knowing. It goes from being complete emptiness, where you first recognize yourself as the stillness, and the emptiness starts to become full with this aliveness of knowing itself in and as absolutely everything. In the divine remembering that where we said that you sever your relationship with world to know yourself, what comes in is a remembering of what the world really is from the true perspective. So then we come back into relationship with the world, but it is consciousness itself coming back into the divine remembering of what the world really is, right? And it's not what we thought it was. It's not what we thought it was. No, it is yourself, and you are remembering yourself. So in this part of the process, there can be a feeling of, there's a knowing of what is true, but there can be a sense of losing it at times, because forgetting comes in as the mechanism. It's the mechanism that is absolutely essential. It is the way that remembering happens and the becoming actually truly happens. If forgetting didn't happen, if the challenges didn't happen, the means would not be here to become one completely and utterly with that you still feel separate with. So everything is orchestrated in consciousness, divinely, perfectly. There is not a single fiber out of place. Nothing is out of place. Everything is perfectly, divinely orchestrated for you to know yourself fully and wholly all the way through opening to the clear seeing of being, of refining in the being to know the Atman, the unified field, to shifting once again from being the Atman to being Brahman. Being Brahman. Sometimes this is called the self, sometimes this is no self. But essentially, Brahman, only Brahman knows Brahman. Brahman already knows Brahman. It's the fullness. When the Atman completely, fully knows itself, in that there is a transcending into a much vaster totality. Let's say that it's opening to the totality, the entirety, the totality, the wholeness, the integral wholeness, the integral wholeness. So wherever you are, you can feel some value of anything that is ever being spoken. It is not a linear journey. It is not climbing a ladder. It is consciousness having the most incredibly rich divine adventure within the infinite field of consciousness in order to know itself. And you are constantly tasting and taking in finer and finer qualities of yourself as the field, the infinite field, becomes more alive with its own intelligence, its own wisdom, knowing itself. Everything within this whole field is divinely orchestrated to know itself perfectly, carrying itself to know its integral wholeness, and in that, its pure divinity, to know its divinity. For God to know God without question is the only purpose of a human life, is to know God and shine the love and light of true divine nature on the surface of life. The true purpose of the human life is to know the true nature and to be carried in the deep realms of consciousness all the way into the fullness, into the nothingness. Prior to consciousness, prior to existence, into the uncreated, unmanifest profundity of divinity, of the glory where there is just light shining, where there is just light shining. Only God knows God. So you have nothing to worry about. You do not have to find a way to know God, because everything is carrying you into God so that God can know God. What is carrying this whole unfolding is God's divine wish to know God through your form and to live on the surface of life. For the mother to know herself and to use your form to know herself on the surface of life. She already knows herself. She already knows herself fully. That is integral wholeness. So, the stillness, the silence, the simplicity, this moment here now, being yourself, feeling the emptiness of now, empty of content. Feel how irrelevant the story is. Do you even know your name? It matters not. It matters not. Everything that is necessary, it moves all by itself. There's no doer, there's no chooser. Everything is just happening. You cannot choose to surrender. Surrender comes through being yourself. Surrender is the essence of a divine life. We could say the first feeling of surrender is to surrender into the humility, to not be pulled by the habitual patterns, to keep following the mind. The first surrender is to have the humility to stay with the being and watch. Resting as the being the being, you are open to grace, and you are just inviting the winds of grace to come and take you. This part you cannot choose, you cannot do, you cannot activate. You can only be yourself. You can be in devotion. You can be turned to truth. You can follow the longing all the way into the presence again and again and again. You can be the living prayer that invites the wind of grace to carry you, carry you, carry you. Mm. 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 The surrender of being, the surrender of receiving life, receiving that which plays on the surface, the surrender of receiving. And the surrender of that receiving allows becoming one with absolutely everything. The surrender to becoming one with the world as consciousness remembering itself, awakening into the deepest remembering of itself as everything. A divine surrender again and again and again. Surrendering into the holiness, surrendering in a quality of pure devotion as these fine, fine feelings of devotion come, where there's no one devoted to something, there's just this holy, holy, alive devotion that has this movement, this flow of devotion, of just surrendering into itself, into itself, into itself. And this pure devotion is, we could say, the divine quality of consciousness, almost like a celestial David quality of consciousness that carries consciousness into the finer qualities of its holiness. The fine qualities of its holiness. God knowing God, God remembering God. There's this subtle layer of perception where this holiness, this devotion comes alive in the very, very, very fine feelings, very, very fine feelings. And it's a perpetual surrender. The recognition is that the essence of all of this is that life is a perpetual surrender of consciousness surrendering into itself, surrendering into itself, surrendering into itself in order to know itself, know itself, know itself. And then it surrenders out of that knowing into the field of absolute nothingness. It surrenders out of being. It surrenders out of being. And yet the divine surrender continues as divinity surrenders into itself. The humility of God is God surrendering into God, into God, into God, into God. And it plays as a life of divine surrender, surrender, surrender. It is the essence of the divine life. Surrender, surrender, surrender. It's the most beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. Holiness, holiness bowing to its own holiness. Holiness just illuminated and falling into its own illumination, falling into itself, the light falling into its own light. Holiness, holiness, holy, holy, wholeness. So as these words come, it is only ever to receive the resonance where there is recognition, where there is attunement, the innermost being is hearing itself. The being that already knows itself is hearing itself and able to receive a deeper, finer resonance of itself and fall in surrender into itself again and again and again. Because this is not a process where we ever land. The surrender is the surrender of all openings. We could say the surrender of all layers that we move through. It's the surrender of all position, all ideas, the surrender again and again and again into the complete and utter openness of not knowing, so that the flow, the power, the force of true divinity can carry itself all the way into the pure light. So you see, freedom is always ready. Freedom is always ready, here, now. Being the timeless being. Mm. Mm. Be with the stillness. Be with the silence. Feel the enlivened quality. Let it swallow you. Let the winds of grace carry you, because you are not attached to anything. You are just like a simple leaf ready to be blown into eternity. Mm. 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 And feel the winds of grace, the Shakti flows, moving as the aliveness to carry you deeper, deeper in to what is true. Mm. 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 Surrender comes. Surrender comes where there's no attachment to the worldly desires. Mm. 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 Thank you for being here. Mm. 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 So resting, absorbed in the being, and we will meet tomorrow morning at 10 for interactions. Mm. 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 Connecting in with each one. There's a lot of bliss in the field. Oh. Mm. Okay. Drinking it all in. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So good. Drinking in the aliveness, the nectar. It's the nectar, the sweetness, the aliveness, that which feels like a resonance. Is to drink it in by staying close, because this nectar is everything. It's what carries everything. This nectar, soma, soma. Okay. Drink it in. Drink it in. Mm. 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 If you feel it as a joy, an openness, as a bliss, as a resonance, as the stillness, however you feel it, drink it in, drink it in, drink it in. Allow yourself to be utterly intoxicated with the beauty, the bliss, the simplicity, the peace of simply being.